In this video, we will show you how to replace your vehicle's four-wheel drive disconnect motor on this Dodge Ram 1500. This will be located attached to your differential housing. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely make your way under the vehicle. Along the back side of the passenger side front differential housing is where you're going to find the part that we're replacing. To be able to do this, we're going to start with the indicator switch right on the driver's side of this. It has an electrical wiring harness. We want to disconnect it. For this, you're going to find that you have a small locking tab that typically you can just take hold of with one of your fingers, pry it out of place. A quick inspection of the terminal end to confirm there's no corrosion, and you can set that aside. Continuing on, we're going to start disconnecting our vacuum lines. This has a small anchor bracket right in the center area here, which you just want to gently flex. Once you have that flexed, you can remove those vacuum lines, and we're going to start disconnecting it from the vacuum motor. Continuing on from there, we're going to disconnect the vacuum lines from that vacuum motor. Now typically for this, you can take hold of it and slide it out of place. If you find you have a hard time with that, you could gently try prying it. There are a couple clamps on here, but typically they don't hold it very tightly. You should be able to just slide this right out of place. There's one. We'll do the same to the other one. Now right up along the top of the housing here, we have one more hose that we're going to disconnect. This has a single time use clamp on it. We'll just go ahead and cut that right off of there. During the installation process, you can either replace the clamp with a new clamp or even just use a wire tie. I'll be using some cutters here. We want to be very careful not to cause any damage to the hose or that housing. Now we should be able to slide that off of there. Same process for this hose, a quick squeeze, soft and pliable. Doesn't look like it's torn or damaged. Set that aside. Before we can start removing the housing from the differential tubing, it's a good idea to try to clean up around where the housing and the tube meet together. Of course, we will try to be careful not to get anything inside of the ports leading into this area, but you do want to make sure there isn't any miscellaneous debris that might fall in. Let's put a collection receptacle under this area. We finished cleaning this. We still have our collection receptacle under here. We're going to start removing our mounting hardware. You're going to find that you have four 11mm mounting bolts holding all this together to the differential tubing. When you do remove this, typically there will be some gear oil that makes its way out. Collect and recycle it properly. Now as for the bolt that's on the top driver's side, that bolt also holds this small bracket in place. We want to remember that for during the installation process. This holds your wiring harness. Now we can start removing this lower bracket. Of course, you do want to clean it up and give it a thorough inspection. Take hold of this housing, go ahead and give it a little wiggle. It's going to separate. There's that gear oil I spoke of. Carefully start pulling this away from the differential. Let's get this over to the bench. Now on the bench, we'll be having a look at this fork area. Now if you were looking deep down inside this area, you can see the shaft that comes off of the four-wheel drive actuator motor here. This actually has a small locking clip on it we're going to have to remove. This is essentially what it looks like right here. I have it on the tip of my magnet so you can have a close look. For this, I'm just going to try to use a flathead screwdriver, see if we can work it out of place. You can also try using a pick if necessary. Looks like it's starting to move here. There's that clip. A quick inspection. We'll set it aside for recycling. Our kit came with a new one. Now there's going to be two more of those clips that we'll have to deal with. One's approximately the same size, the other one's a little bit larger. For those though, we're going to have to start sliding this fork outward away from the shift motor. Now we can have a peek down inside this area. You can see the second locking clip, and the third one, which is the largest of the three, is all the way up against the housing area. Just try using my angled pick to get this one out of here. There's that one, same as the first. Now we can move the fork around quite a bit. We're going to gain access to that third locking clip. This is the larger one of the three, as I've mentioned. Careful not to cause any damage here. Now we're going to take hold of the shift motor and we're going to start sliding it out of place. When doing so, there's a couple things that we'll pay attention to. We have this fork area here. During the installation process, we want to make sure we have it in the same orientation. You can see this curved area. Also, once you turn this around, we want to make sure that we have the vacuum tubes facing in the same direction during the installation. So just take quick note of that. Start sliding this out of here. You may find when you're trying to remove the shift motor from the area, it's stuck in place. If that's the case, you could try holding onto the housing here and tapping on the shift motor to remove it. Let's just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. Came free fairly easily there. Slide that fork right off of there. A close inspection. There it is, friend. Now let's have a close look at the four-wheel drive actuating fork. There's two plastic shoes on this that have to be removed and replaced. It's a good idea to replace them because they could be worn. We'll just go ahead and pry those right out of place. You can dispose of those properly. There's one. There's the other one. Just use a clean rag. We'll clean up the mating surface, give it a close inspection, of course. Now that we have that cleaned, we can install our two brand new shoes. Now for each of these, you're going to have to try to align them and press them into position. Typically, you're going to find that you have a hard time pressing this in. You could try using some pliers. Just be extremely careful not to cause any damage. This can be a little bit challenging. Press that right on there. Go ahead and give it a quick slide, a close inspection to make sure it's not broken or damaged in any way. That one looks fine. That can move. Let's repeat the process for the next one. Slide that around. Definitely has movement. Now we can install a brand new O-ring gasket on our shift motor. That's going to go all the way down this shafted area, down to this groove. Just press it on there. Work it all the way down. If you do have to use a screwdriver or pick, be extremely careful not to cause any damage to that seal, otherwise you're going to want to replace it. At this point, we'll add a little bit of petroleum jelly to that gasket to help it work into place. Some on my gloved finger, just spread it around. Now let's start installing the shift motor into the housing. We want to make sure we have it in the proper orientation as we continue bringing it in. But before you do press it all the way in, let's go ahead and have a look on the inside here. As you remember, during the removal process, we had the shift fork. We want to make sure we have it in the proper orientation. We're going to turn this around. You can see that we have this grooved area. That's going to make it so it can go around this portion of the housing. So we'll just carefully slide this back out a little bit. We'll slide that fork right onto the shaft here. And now we can continue on with bringing this in once it is properly aligned. Like I said, we just want to have it in the same orientation. Go ahead and press it right in. Double check to make sure it's bottomed out. Looking on the inside of the housing, where you can see that shift motor, we're going to install the larger of our C-clamps here. For this, you can just align it with the small groove and press it in. I'm going to use a magnet to get it down in there close, and then we'll continue on pressing it in. As for pressing this in, I'm just going to use a flat blade screwdriver. Once we have it aligned, you should be able to tap it into position. Just be extremely careful here. Have a close look inside this area, confirming that the clamp is properly secured all the way around inside the groove. It's common for that clamp to get caught up against one side of the housing or the other and look like it's properly in place, but it may not be. It's extremely important that it is. Go ahead and take hold of the housing and that shift motor, and we're going to try to separate the two. It should not slide out. If it slides out, that clip is definitely not in place. This feels good, we can continue on. Now that we've confirmed that that's in there securely, we're going to pay attention deep inside this area. We installed the larger clamp already on the base of the vacuum motor. Now we want to look at the shaft area. There's actually a small groove all the way up in here. It's painted in blue. That's where our first clamp will go. Looks like it needs to go a little bit further here. I'm going to try to use my pick to try to remove it from the groove. It should not fall out of place. That seems good. I'm just going to put some petroleum jelly right on the shaft here. We'll slide this fork up as far as possible. You can see the next groove. After sliding that down the shaft, we'll continue on with our second small clamp here. That's going to go into this groove. You can see it right along here. Just have to try to press it on there as far as possible, tap it in. Just like before, we're going to try to take hold of that locking clip, ensure it's properly secured in there. Continuing on after that, you want to take hold of the fork, and we're going to attempt to move this back and forth. We're just confirming that each one of the clamps is still in place where it needs to be. This looks perfect. Let's get it back over to the vehicle. Before we install that, let's make sure we clean up the mounting area. Commonly, you're going to find some debris and possibly even the gasket, like what you can see here. I'm just going to use a flat blade scraper for this. We'll be careful not to make any debris go inside the differential tube housing here. As we clean this, we're trying to scrape away from the inside. Got a clean rag with some parts cleaner directly on it. As I mentioned, you don't want to try to get any of that inside of the differential tube. Let's go ahead and wipe this down. Double check to make sure it's a flat surface all the way around so you have a good seal in this area. Now we'll start bringing this into place. When we do so, we're paying attention to the forked area in comparison to this sleeve that you can see inside. It's important to make sure it's properly aligned, so when this actuates, it's going to slide this over onto each one of these areas. It should be able to move around fairly freely in here. Let's get the gasket in place. Paying attention to that fork, as I mentioned, we'll just slide that fork right over that grooved area and continue on with the two upper mounting bolts. Go ahead and start them in. Now that we've got this in place, we want to make sure that we do have our small bracket on the left top here. Start in the mounting bolt. We'll start in the other upper mounting bolt. We are not going to tighten either of these yet. Before the two lower bolts, we have our shield. Now that we have all that in place, go ahead and snug up all 4 bolts and then torque them to 89 inch-pounds. We'll just go around one more time for good measure. Continuing on, it's time to start reconnecting our wiring harness here. We'll go ahead and line that up, press it in. Listen for a click from that, a quick wiggle, make sure it's properly secured. Now it's time for our vacuum lines. The vacuum lines will have to make its way through this bracket here. It's going to make its way all the way up to that motor. Double check the ends here. Try to line it up. Typically you can press this right on. If you did have to squeeze on the clamps, you could use some long nose pliers. Once you have it pressed on, go ahead and give it a light tug. We're trying to separate it without causing any damage. It should not slide off. We'll secure it into its mounting bracket here. Now there should be a clamp on this as well. If you do not have a clamp or you don't want to reuse that clamp, go ahead and use a wire tie. We just want to make sure this is secure so no moisture or debris makes its way in this area. Now let's make our way along the front of the differential where you can see your front differential cover. You're going to find a 17mm bolt head here that we're going to start unscrewing to remove this plug. When you do remove the plug, it's possible there's still fluid in this area that might try to make its way out. Let's have our collection receptacle under here. We need to check the level and top it off as necessary. A quick inspection of that plug, confirming it's not rotted, weak, or damaged. This one looks fine. Now to check the fluid level, we'll have a clean gloved finger here. We're going to carefully reach inside of this port. You only really need to come in just a little bit. As you curl your finger down, you should find that the fluid's pretty much at the top level right here, or even just a little bit below it. There definitely should be fluid up to that point. If the fluid's down here, it can cause damage to your differential. Now, assuming you do need to top off the front differential fluid, you're going to want to use 80-90 gear oil in the front differential, and when we fill it, we're just waiting to see a steady trickle of fluid coming out of here. If you add too much and it's a lot of fluid making its way out, just go ahead and wait a minute or so until it's a light trickle. Now, clearly adding fluid to this area can be a little bit difficult. Your drag link is in the way, so we'll just be extremely careful along the way here. Now I've cleaned my fill plug here. I also applied some thread sealer to this, so let's go ahead and start this back in. When you go to put this in, of course you do want to start it in by hand so you're sure you are not cross-threading it. We'll use our 17mm to bottom this out and just make sure it's nice and snug. Okay, right there is where it wants to stop. As you can tell, it doesn't go completely in until you can't see any threads. The plug itself will stop in the pan cover. Once you have that nice and tight, go ahead and clean up your mess in this area. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and hop in the passenger compartment, and we're going to test the functionality of our four-wheel drive. Ensure that it properly shifts into four-wheel drive and then back into two-wheel drive. If it does not, there might be an issue inside this area. Aside from that, you can go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test, and when you come back, double check for leaks. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.